Hello everyone. Thank you for joining today's Lunch and Learn served by the FileMaker team at Cross IT. Before we dig in, remember that you have a chance to win lunch on us if you leave a comment or ask a question during the live stream. That means we'll send you a gift card. So please send us your email address somehow, some way, so we can contact you. Last month, we took an in-depth look at the let function. In today's installment, Todd is going to talk about the while function. The setup and syntax is similar, but we now have the ability to repeat portions of the logic to generate the final result. This powerful function gives developers another option when solving complex problems. Without further ado, let me pass the microphone over to Todd.
All right, thank you, Kristen. So we're going to be talking about the while function today. And as she mentioned, the big thing that it does for us is that it actually repeats sections of logic while the condition remains true. And we're able to return a result that is, the combination of these initial values that we set as well as the repeated logic. And it allows for this repeated logic without having to use a script or out having to use a recursive custom function. And with that, we also are able to make our formulas a little bit more efficient. And so when you go into the calculation editor and you start typing while and the type ahead, it will fill in what you see there, and we're going to dive into each of those components there that make up our while function as we define it. And then if you need any additional information, you can always, of course, check out help.claris.com to get some more details. All right, so have here what I like to call the Wellerized version of the while function, just that it kind of breaks things out a little bit easier, so it's easier to kind of visualize where do I need to fill in the blanks, as it were. And what you see there is it's while. There's a set of square brackets that have the initial variables that are defined and set up. Then you have your condition. Then you have another set of square brackets that have your logic section, and then you get down to your result. So what do each of those sections look like? In the initial variable section, it's again very similar to the let syntax. This is where you're declaring your variables that are available within the scope of the function, and as it kind of implies, you're setting their initial values. The variable types that you're able to use here again are your the function variables, the script variables, or those single $sign variables, as well as global variables if the need arises, which would be your double $sign variables. And then the expressions, those can be they can be calculations, they can be field values, or they can be a constant value that you just want to have up there in that section with your square brackets. All right, so we're going to skip over condition for just a second, and then we're going to go ahead and move down to that second set of square brackets. And this is where the logic is that's going to be repeated. And it's just so cool to think about being able to repeat logic. I'm going to repeat it. That is the place where the repeated logic goes. And these are these expressions that are going to be evaluated for each iteration of your loop within that while function. Again, you've got the same variable types as what you have, as well as the same types of expressions where it's calculations, field values, constant values, and of course you're going to be pulling from those initial variables that you've declared in that first set of square brackets above. All right, so that's where, as I like to say, that's where the magic happens, is right there. All right, so let's go ahead and take a step back and take a look at the condition. And this is where you set your exit condition for the logic. As you might expect, this is a Boolean expression, which could be any one of those Boolean operators to get your true or false result, and when it's evaluated. One thing to keep in mind is, just as the way it's above that repeated logic, it's also evaluated first. So the function is going to evaluate your condition statement before it does any of the repeated logic. And so the function is going to continue looping while the condition remains true, and then as soon as it becomes false, that's when it's going to exit, and then your function is going to return its result. And like I said, because it is evaluated first, you definitely want to make sure that the condition or the the logic that's in there starts off as true, because if it starts off as false, it's actually going to skip all of that repeated logic section and then just jump right to the result. So just be aware of that as you use it. And then of course, and then the last thing is the result, which it can be a calculation, it can just be the result of that repeated logic section. You have the ability even to, you can have a nested let function if you need it, or even another nested while function. So there's a lot that you're able to do once you've done the repeated logic and you get down to send out your final response. So that's an overview of how you set up the function. So let's go ahead and dive into a couple examples. The first example I want to look at is something that I've done in different iterations over the years, where the user comes to a record, there's a script trigger on that record where they go into the record, we grab all of the values that are the current state of that record in either a global field or a global variable, and then as they make changes, there's a button that then appears that forces them to acknowledge whether they want to accept those changes or revert it back, and then we examine the contents of those, again, global fields or global variables. And then the process just repeats as you page through the records. Well, with the addition of the JSON objects that we're able to handle natively now in FileMaker, it's become a lot more easy to handle if you have just one variable or one field that has everything in it that's formatted as a JSON object. At least in my mind, it's easy, but then I do that all the time. But what you have then is, okay, we need to then still build that JSON object. And one of the ways that you're able to do that, of course, is you just go through every single field that appears on your layout, and then you just update your JSON object as you step through the script, which is great until you either remove a field or add a field, and then all of a sudden now you need to edit your script. Well, FileMaker has given us some functions that we're able to go in and kind of do things dynamically without having to hard code any of this, and go ahead and build it that way. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to build two scripts. One is going to use a traditional loop, and then we're going to go ahead and use one that does with the while function, so you can kind of compare and see what the difference is. So let's go ahead in here and get our script editor open. I've already got a couple scripts that are started that we can just go ahead and start populating. All right, so the first thing that we need to do in our script is we need to get, of course, the list of fields that are on our layout. And that's, one of these cases where FileMaker has been nice enough to give us a function that returns all of that information, which is field names. It's one of the design functions. All right, and we just have to give it a file name. And again, we're going to use a get function to do that. And then the same thing for the layout name. So this way it kind of makes our script that we're writing, we could actually use it anywhere because we're not hard coding any of this information. All right, so that looks good. And then the last thing that we need to do before we get into setting up our loop that's going to build this for us is we want another set variable where we're just going to get the count of, and that's just a value count of our list that we captured above. Okay, all right, so that's kind of setting the stage for us, and now we're ready to go ahead, dive in, and go ahead and set up our loop. All right, now the first thing we want to do is we want to, we're going to use an index, so we want to have a value that increments. So we're just going to set another variable here, specify that. It's going to be and I'm able to do it this way because we all know that because I'm using a local variable, it has no value until the script is actually open and running. So I'm, that first time through, it's just taking a value of nothing and adding 1 to give me that first value. So it's just kind of nice the way that that works out. And now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and get the field name for this iteration of the loop, and then I want to get the value. And again, we're going to be able to rely on a couple of, of course, built-in functions that FileMaker has so kindly given us. And the first one here field name, and that's going to be the get value function, and our input is going to be our list of fields, and we want to get a specific value which corresponds with that iteration of the loop, so that's where our index value comes in. And then the last one here is we want to go ahead and now we want to get the value. Okay, and then this one here is, it is a get function, but it's not in the typical get format where it's get and then parenthesis and then some value. This one here is just get field, and that is going to return the contents of that specific field, and that's where we just use our field name variable that we declared just above. And so now we're able to get the field name, we're able to get the value, and now we're ready to go ahead and add it to our JSON object. So we use one last set variable. Set the element, so we'll refer back to ourselves, and then our index is just the field name. The value, of course, is the field value, and then for the sake of this, we're just going to have everything be a JSON string for the format. That looks good. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to come down here, and right now I'm working all in local variables. I'm just going to do one final thing to put it into a global variable so that we can view it in the data viewer, which is the, oops, get my $sign in there. If I could type and spell today. And then we're just going to do a JSON. And of course, this is not really needed to use the JSON format elements, but it makes it a little bit easier to read because of the formatting. So I like to do that. So that's our script. And so let's go ahead and get our tools open here with our data viewer, which of course there is nothing defined. And if I hit the button here to go ahead and execute that script, oh, this is why you shouldn't code live. I forgot to put my exit condition in there, so shame on me for that. So we had an infinite loop going on there. So we'll go back in there and add that in. We want to exit the loop if where we have the index is greater than or equal to that field count variable that we set there at the beginning. So let's save that and try that again. And then you see that we get our result here. And if I go ahead and open that up, you see we have this nice formatted JSON object that includes all of the information from our current record. Okay, so pretty easy, straightforward stuff. I'm sure you've probably done things similar to that in some of your own solutions. So what is this going to look like if we go ahead and convert it now to a while function? All right, so let's go down here. We'll start a new script. And we can actually do all of this in a single step. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and we're going to set another variable. In this example, I'm definitely going to go ahead and open up our calculation editor so we have more space. All right, and we're just going to go ahead and start with the while function. Okay. All right, so again, this is in that first set of square brackets is where we are setting our initial values. So again, we want to have a field list, and that's again going to be field names. That's our get function. function to get our layout name. All right. All right, and then of course we want to get our field count, which is the same thing here. All right, so we've got that started. Okay, now again, so the condition comes first. We want to go ahead and declare this, and because it comes first and it has to start off as true, it's kind of the opposite of what we had going on in our script. So in this case, we actually want to we're going to define an index, but if the index is less than the field count, we want the result of this Boolean operation to be true so that the logic continues to run. So we're going to go ahead and put it in there like that. Okay, now we're ready to get into our logic. All right, which is, of course, we want to increment our index, of course. All right, so we've got that. Now we want to go ahead and do the same thing. We're going to get the field name and the field value then. All right, and so our list of values is, of course, the field list that we defined above, and the value number is our index. All right, so nothing crazy so far. And then the field, again, value. We're going to use that built-in function, get field, and then field name. All right, and then the last step that we want to do is we're just going to go ahead and add that to our JSON object. Since it forced me to set the condition above, I won't forget it again. And then we're just going to go ahead and add as our calculation or our final result, we're just going to go ahead and use that JSON format elements just to make it look pretty and easier to read for us. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Oh, got an error. All right, it says that the index cannot be found. Well, this is one of those things where using the while function is a little bit different than the script, is because I haven't defined the index within the function. And so I'm setting it down here, but of course we haven't gotten to that portion of logic. So that's one of those extra things that you'll need to do is you actually want to go in here and whether you're counting down or counting up, you'll want to set your exit condition or whatever's being used in that exit condition to make sure that it is true. So we're going to go ahead and define that so that the function knows what index is. Okay, and if I try to click OK again, we're saying, oh, we've got another error. And again, the same thing with the JSON. Even though I'm defining the JSON right here, because I'm also using it and kind of referring back to itself to add on that next name value pair to the JSON object, it doesn't know what the JSON is. So we want to go ahead and define that value too, where if I just go ahead and set it equal to just the set of curly braces, which is just an empty JSON object, everything is going to be happy now. And then we'll just start adding those name value pairs once we get down to the repeated logic here. Oh, and I got, oh, that's what it didn't like, is it didn't like, failed to put in semicolon. All right, so now we'll just give this one here a name. Click OK. Go ahead and save that. Now I'm going to go ahead over here, and I'm just going to pick a different record. All right, and then now if I run our new second script, oh, I guess it helps if I make it a global. There we go. All right. So now when I run it, we've we've got our while result, which looks exactly like the script result that we had, but of course, as you can tell from the script itself, we did it in just a single step. So now the question might come up is, what does that do for your performance? So I went ahead and actually have some completed scripts that have all of my comments in there and everything. But what I also did is I took both of those scripts and I added I'm capturing the start time in milliseconds, the end time in milliseconds, and then I'm just throwing up a little custom dialogue here at the end to kind of tell me, okay, how long did it take? So if I go ahead and run the script here that is going to use all the script steps, and I run that, you can see, okay, it took 0.002 seconds, okay, to run through that. Now if I come down here and run it for the while function, okay, it took, a millisecond, all right? So obviously you're not, it's not taking a long time if you're using, the regular script steps, but you are, when you're dealing with milliseconds, you've cut the time in half. So that's a question you're going to have to ask yourself is, how many of my processes do I want to revisit and try to redo with the while to get that performance gain? It may be worth your programming time to do that. It may not. That's one of those things where you're going to have to make the call. But there are definitely some areas where performance is going to be improved because you're using the while function. Okay, so that's kind of just using it in a script to assemble some information, a calculation that you want on the fly. You don't want to have to clutter up your database schema with a calculation field, but you have a lot of power now with being able to loop things and pull that together. So the other example we wanted to look at is replacing it for a recursive custom function. Custom functions have been around for a long time, where you can put your own combination of formulas and constants together to do a specific task that you can just refer to by the custom function rather than having to recreate it all the time. You're able to import them from one solution to another, so it makes those chunks of code very portable. And that was, until the while function, that was the only way that you could repeat logic if you wanted to, because what you can do with a custom function that you can't do with a regular FileMaker function is that a custom function can call itself. So you're able to set up this idea of doing a recursive function call. Okay, so that is certainly a powerful thing, but what does that look like? So let's go ahead and go back into the script editor, and we're just going to do a very simple thing of assembling a unique list of the cities that are represented here in my test database. And so we'll do a set variable. We want to get all cities. And this here is where we're going to use a custom function that I found a number of years ago on a website that's maintained by Brian Dunning, where developers are able to share their custom functions through. So it's a really great resource. And what it is that you just indicate what field you want to use to get your found list from, and then it's just going to go through the entire found set and get you that list. Okay, and since we're not really worried about getting the whole list, we're just going to go ahead and do a final step into a global here. Declare it as a custom. All right, and we're just going to go ahead and use the unique values function so that we just get that list of unique cities that are represented here in my test data. Okay. All right. So if I do that, run the function, and we've got our result over here in the data viewer. And if I go ahead and get into that, and you can see we've got a whole bunch of cities represented. Okay. All right. So what does the custom function look like? Because obviously I'm just calling a single function when I set it up. So we'll go ahead here under the hood a moment, get into our manage custom functions. We want to look at the found list and go ahead and expand this out so you can all see it a little bit easier. Like I said, you have a couple parameters that we've defined for it, the field name and the starting position, which should always be set to 1 because you're always going to be starting with the found list. But then the function itself is right here. Okay, is that you're using the get nth record function, which is a built-in FileMaker function, which has those same parameters of field name and start position. But here what you're able to do is that add a case statement that if the start position is less than the total found count of your records, we're going to go to throw in a pilcrow or a carriage return and then call that function again and then just increment our start position. So we've want it for the first one, it's like, well, that's less than the total number, so I'm going to go now set that position to 2 and run it again, and then I'm going to set the position to 3 and run it, and you just keep adding on, and that's what makes the custom function recursive in this instance, and that's what is able to get us the result. All right, so that's the custom function version, but what does it look like if we want to do that same thing with a while function? All right, so let's go ahead and get over here to our new script. All right. And so and again, just because I'm going to go ahead and just declare the global variable right here at the top. Okay, and then now we can start specifying. So okay, and again, because I know there's certain things that I need to declare here that I didn't have to in the loop, I'm going to go ahead and set up my index to be 0. I'm going to go ahead and capture the found count of my records, because I'll definitely need that, of course. And then I'm going to go ahead and, just because of how I'm building the list, I'm going to go ahead and set up city list as an empty string. Okay, as I declare these variables. Again, the index or the condition is going to be pretty much the same, where it's index less than the found count is when I want my logic to be repeated. Okay, and the reason why that works rather than using like a less than or equal to is that when it gets to that last one that's just 1 less than the found count, it's going to run the logic, which is going to increment the index, and that will be the last one. So you don't want to have it run it again. So that's one of those areas where you just need to be aware of, like, what is my exit condition, so I'm not executing that logic 1 time too many or 1 time too few is usually what happens when I've been debugging, and you have to really try to get in there and figure out. All right, so there's that, and then now we can go ahead and set up our logic that's repeated, which again is just index equals index plus 1. And we'll get our list city value, which is just get nth record. And this one here, we can go ahead and get the city. Our record number, of course, is the index. And then all we need to do here is just go ahead and add it to our city list. And typically when I'm doing this, I found this trick a while back, where I actually go ahead and use the list function, and since the city list or the list function will collapse your list if you have any empty records, then that just means that for that first time I don't have to worry about coding in an if statement that if this is the first one, do this and then do this for everything else. I'm just able to do the same thing all at once. Okay, so that gives us that. And then for our final result, we're just going to go ahead and use that unique values function on our city list. And then that will complete our function. Oh, I missed an operator somewhere. There we go. All right. Okay, so again, a very nice 1-line script do that. Go ahead and save it. Now when I run it, okay, so now you see we've got, just by previewing it, looks like that we've got pretty much the same list as what we'd assembled before. So obviously the result is going to be the same whether we want to use the recursive custom function or the other. But what I did do is I went ahead and set up the same kind of thing where I added comments, but then I also capturing start time, stop time, and then just doing a little bit of math on it to figure out how many seconds it actually takes. So if we go ahead and run the custom function version, and you can see that it put 0.762 seconds to loop through the 10,001 records that we have in here and assemble that list. So if I go over here and run the same with the while, 0.615 seconds. So saving about a little over a tenth of a second. Again, that's one of those things, is that improvement in performance worth the extra programming time to make changes. Only you can be the judge of that, but you definitely are going to see some improvement in the functions. So that is kind of like an introductory into the while function. So I guess looking at the clock on the wall, I think it's probably time here to go ahead and see if anybody has any questions.
I do have a couple of questions. You may have already covered this, but the first question is, with the while function, do you still use custom functions?
Yeah, the answer is yes. I still do use the custom functions because there have certainly been cases where I've realized it's not worth going back into every solution I've ever put out there to redo the custom functions and convert them into while functions. But there are certain cases where you still want to use the custom function. Obviously, if it's a custom function specific to your solution, you're going to continue to use that, of course. But then the other thing too is because custom functions are portable, because you can import them from one solution to another, is that even in those cases where I had been using that custom function for the recursiveness of it, if that's even a word, is that it's still nice to go ahead and take that custom function, edit it, convert it to the while function, and then that then allows you to then make that code a little bit more portable, so you don't have to rewrite it every time you want to, okay, I want to use this now in this new solution that I'm building. So that's a good thing that you're able to do there.
Okay, and the next question is, what is the hardest part of writing a calculation with the while function?
Probably the hardest thing is just the debugging portion of it. You'll notice I made several errors today on purpose just to point out the differences, but I did forget to put in my exit condition in the loop whenever I was building that first script. And of course, if I used script debugger, I would have easily caught that and realized, oh, I don't have an exit condition. Unfortunately, with the while function, because you're building it within a calculation, there's no calculation debugger really. So sometimes figuring out why a loop is not being executed enough times or too many times, or especially if you've got a very complex calculation, it can be tough to debug if you don't get it right. So that's the one thing that's just to be aware of. Now the one thing that is nice, because I put myself in an infinite loop because I'd forgotten to put in the exit loop if step there in that first script, but the while function is already built in where it's only going to run a certain number of times. I want to say the default is 50,000 iterations, but don't quote me on that. It's been a while since I've looked at that. So you won't put yourself into an infinite loop and then you have to force quit FileMaker and things like that, which can be rough. It'll eventually exit and you can get back in and figure out what's going on. But with that, and one thing I forgot to mention earlier, is that if you are running a loop that is going to require more iterations than whatever that default is, there's a new script step that came with the while, which is set recursion. So you can adjust that number as needed, so you can get the enough iterations to get the right result. So, but that is the toughest thing, is just debugging it.
Okay, what are some real-life use cases for using the while function?
Okay, well, I think obviously replacement for recursive custom functions. As you saw, there's obviously performance improvement that you can see. I know when they first announced that the while function was going to be made available when they were talking about the release of FileMaker 18, that was the thing that got me most excited, was just being able to use it for those recursive functions. And then some of the other areas are the places where you want to do something complex. You want to pull a lot of different information together, but you want to try to keep it as lean as possible. Where there's some improvements there, and that's one of those cases where the effort in debugging may be worth it because of the performance gain that you're going to get in those areas. I know I've used it where you can kind of build a list of items to put into the body of an email message if the user doesn't want to have an attachment to an email that has like an invoice or something. You are able to build some of the body of the email and include those line items using the while function, so you don't have to clutter up your solution with extra fields and calculations that only serve that one purpose. So that's a few of the areas there. So
Okay, that is all the questions that I have. We have a few upcoming events that we would like to mention as we close. First, if you are in the Pittsburgh area and want to talk FileMaker with like-minded individuals, please consider joining FM Berg, the Pittsburgh FileMaker Developer Group, at our next meeting on Wednesday, December 1st at 6:30 p.m. This is a hybrid meeting, so if you can't join us in person, you can always log in and join us remotely. With the busy holiday schedule next month, we are only offering the one lunch and learn in December, and that will be on Wednesday, December 15th at noon. What will Todd talk about next? You'll just have to tune in to find out. Again, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and joining us today. If you like what you saw and heard, please click the thumbs up and share this video. If you haven't subscribed, we humbly ask that you do. You can also just hit the bell to get notified. Some of the content presented as part of our Lunch and Learn sessions are the result of your questions. If you have a suggestion for a future topic, or if a specific FileMaker problem has you stumped, please submit those topics and questions by emailing us at nutshell@crossit.com. Your idea or question may be the featured topic of a future Lunch and Learn. At Cross IT, we are glad to have served you. Have a great day.